In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Today, as a final week in our creation season, we celebrate the feast of Francis of Assisi, and our readings come from that feast. And Francis is one of those great saints who has made his way not only into church culture, but into popular culture. And if I think of the standard image of Francis of Assisi, it is that garden sculpture of him kind of standing there holding a little bird bath, a little bird on his shoulder, right? If you've been to any big box garden shop, you know what I'm talking about, right? But I want to begin today with a different image of Francis of Assisi than the bird bath and the monk's robe. It's Francis as a young man, in a time of uncertainty and anxiety in his life, standing in a town square, where his father has brought him in front of the magistrate in order to sue him for the monies he has given to the poor. And Francis in that town square, probably full of onlookers and curious people, the kind that cause rubbernecking traffic slow-ups, right? In the medieval time, the town square is where that happened. We're wondering what he was going to do. Would he go back to life as normal and return to his family's business of silk trading? Or would he walk in some other direction toward the unknown? How did Francis get in this predicament? Let's back up a little bit. In his early life, he had everything anyone could have wanted. He grew up wealthy, he was popular, he was handsome, he was fun. He was what in my generation would be called one of the cool kids. He sat at the good table in the cafeteria where all the cool kids sat. He had a life of luxury and all the finest things. His dad was a rich silk merchant, his mother was a French noblewoman, and anything he wanted, he had it, and he did. But as life often does, some wrinkles got thrown into the silk of Francis's journey. And when he was fighting in a little local war against another city-state called Perugia from Assisi, he was captured as a prisoner of war, and during the year he was captured, he became very ill. And it made him reevaluate his life and think about what might be important. But here's the interesting thing. When he came back home, as often happens, the gravitational force of the known took over. And he just went right back to life as usual. Right? What we know is such a powerful attractor. A few years later, he was off to volunteer on another romantic jaunt as a knight in Apulia. And at that point, he had this vision. And the vision gave him a breakthrough of understanding. And the understanding, we could say, was simply this: that there was more to life than just more. He decided at that moment that he really wanted to be a disciple of Jesus. He, like everybody else in his society, had grown up Christian, and he was familiar with the texts and going to church and all that. But he wanted more than that. He wanted to apprentice his life to Jesus. He wanted to know what it would be like to live like Jesus in his time and place. He realized that all of us, whether we mean to be or not, are disciples of someone or something. If it is in Jesus, it's going to be something else. In his world, it was building the business, the family business. In our world, many commentators today that say that all of us are disciples of the marketing industry. That we have so many things marketed to us, we don't even really realize it's happening. And a big portion of the millions and millions of dollars that go into making us want things, go into making us think that it's our own idea that we want them. But it's typically not. Here's how it usually works. some need or small problem is exaggerated in a commercial. Oh my God, you have belly fat. Oh well, right? But in the commercial, it's the end of the world. And just as you're about to despair, there is a solution. And for 3 easy payments, it can be yours. And life can get back on track, right? This is what discipleship looks like if we're unconscious about it. And there we are, making those payments, right? So what did Francis do? Let's go back to him. In 1205, he renounced his family wealth, and he took on the life of a vagabond. He became what in those days was called a lay penitent, basically a wandering holy person who didn't have anything. He served lepers, he did manual labor repairing churches, and he developed a great devotion to the Holy Eucharist, and he led this simple kind of holy hobo lifestyle. And the amazing thing is, the surprising thing is that when any of us fully espouses God's call in our lives, great things happen. And so from the small beginnings of being a holy hobo in the outskirts of Assisi, Francis ends up in his own lifetime founding one of the largest religious communities in the world that still today spans multiple religious orders and multiple denominations, including our own, right, the Franciscans. He became sort of the focal point and the fulcrum of the renewing of the knowledge that God is found through engaging creation, not shutting our eyes to it. And so according to some, the Renaissance would have never happened if it weren't for that holy hobo putting brick on brick, building little churches no one went to anymore. And he was canonized a saint only 2 years after his death. And if you have any idea of how slowly the church moves, that's kind of like instantaneous. Little trivia for you. Francis wasn't Francis's name. His real name was Giovanni. He was called Francis or Francesco as a nickname from his dad. And one of the meanings of that name is free person. Francis, in his life, became a free person. And so can we. And our gospel lesson gives us some hints how. So today we hear this parable of the rich fool, and we might wonder what's actually foolish about this guy. He wasn't initially even a greedy person. He seemed surprised that he did so well in the harvest in that year and that he ends up with so much stuff. But we can see the issue if you paid attention to his conversation with himself. He has a conversation with himself about himself, and inside that self-focused conversation, he addresses himself. Scholars have counted 11 first-person pronouns or verbs in that little sentence, right? First person means it's referring to me. So what the wealth does to him is it makes him lose his sense of relationship, right? His sense of stewardship. And it spirals him inward. He's just about me, myself, and I, right? Jesus mentions this parable as a warning against greed. And the interesting thing is, the wealth itself made the farmer greedy. In German, one of the terms for greed is the sickness of having. And we see this sickness in the beginning of the story. Right? The setup for Jesus' parable is two brothers who are fighting over an inheritance. That what should have been abundance for both of them, because of the sickness of having, has put them at odds against each other. Instead of the wealth building relationships, breaking relationships. And it seems to be true for all of us humans that the more we have or the more we get, the more we need to be on guard against that sickness of having. Like any other addiction, the more we get, the more we can end up wanting. And this is not a modern phenomenon, right? John Cassian, one of the great saints in the 4th century, that's like the 300s, right? He says, when money increases, the frenzy of covetousness intensifies. So that's really the problem here, right? This is the problem with the rich fool. It's not that he got wealthy. But it's that he tried to use the wealth to insulate himself from others, even from fate and fortune, figuring he can build his own future, rather than building bridges into his community, which was the expectation then and the Christian expectation now for those who have wealth, right? Wealth makes relationships. The problem with the farmer is he became his own security. He didn't need God anymore. And he, in this very dramatic fashion in this story, dies alone. Francis of Assisi, in saying no to greed and covetousness, was free to build relationships. And he's known as the saint of nature, right? The patron saint of the environment, preaching to the birds and making deals with wolves who were attacking towns. And his relationships extended into the human world too. He was one of the few people to travel into Egypt to try to make peace with the Sultan between Crusaders and the Caliphate, which were at war at that time, and was well received by the Sultan. One of the quotes from Francis is he says, "Your God is of your flesh. He lives in your nearest neighbor, in every person." Francis was interested in nature. He was interested in what happened in the world. He was interested in this faraway issue with the Sultan because he knew that the Scriptures taught him to be focused here, in a dying age of otherworldliness where he lived, much like some of our world today, where many see earth as simply a way station on the way to somewhere else. Francis realized that earth is home. God has made us stewards of this place. That's what our Bible teaches us. And it teaches us that salvation, whatever that may mean, and it may mean many different things through time and for different folks, it's worked out here. And so Francis becomes the patron saint of animals and of the environment. And that's kind of a big deal because wherever you go, there's the environment. So it's kind of like being the patron saint of everything, right? When he walked out of that town square as a young man, he didn't go back to business as usual. He went into the unknown. He wanted a life that wasn't measured by how much he had in a barn or a pantry or a house or what was sitting in his driveway. He wanted a life measured by the people he touched and the people who touched him. He wanted a life of storing up love. He knew there was more to life than just more. Each of us, like Francis, stands in that town square. Each day we're faced with the same questions that he was faced with. Do we go back to what we know? Do we buy into the marketing that feeds this hunger, right? This sickness of having? Do we go into what our society tells us is safe? Or do we follow Jesus? Because we know that things and money don't bring us happiness or security. But it's so hard to choose something else when all of that is so easy and immediate. As Christians today, if we're not actively being discipled and formed by Jesus, we are being discipled and formed by the culture of the town square. Have no doubt about it. The problem is that being discipled to our culture leads to that sickness, that addiction of greed. And like any other addiction, that greed can lead to isolation and despair. And we see that in the symbol of the rich fool. The cure is biblical stewardship, how we share, how we build bridges with the resources we have, how we become part of the great chain of being. Francis, in many ways, was just a regular guy. But he was a regular guy who got cleared of the sickness of having. And we look at his life, we can see what's possible when that sickness is healed. Now, this cure is something that, at least I know in my life, sometimes I really need it, right? Because I hear all that marketing too. And it's not something that you can purchase. But it can come to you in 3 easy installments. Let me share them with you in closing. First is God. Right? If we want to free ourselves from all those voices, we need to spend time in prayer, spend time in reflection, thinking about what really brings us joy. Explore the difference between getting a buzz by buying something and being really happy because you're in relationship with others, with God, with yourself, with nature. Second installment are others. Surround yourself with the kind of people who have what you want. Not in terms of stuff, but in terms of peace and contentment. People who are rich toward God. And finally, the third installment is find some way to spend time in nature, building relationships with the natural world. Many of our saints teach us that nature is God's greatest teacher. We're learning today that simply being in nature heals our bodies and quiets our minds. Whether it's a big trip to a national park or just parking yourself in a chair in your backyard, take the time. Be there. The problem with these 3 easy installments is they take longer than writing a check. They take dedication and practice and discipline. But I think it's important because even more than in Francis' time, we are being strongly discipled by the world. And that can be to our own demise. One more piece of trivia for you, and then I'm going to close out, I promise. Francis isn't only the patron saint of everything, the environment. He's the patron saint, interestingly, of not dying alone. Isn't that odd? And clearly, that's at least figuratively true. Because if we live like Francis, and we don't have to give up everything we own to do this, right? But if we live like Francis by not being attached, by building relationships, by when we get resources, using some of those resources to make the world better and build bridges among people, no matter what happens to us physically, on a spiritual level, we will never die alone. We will be surrounded by and connected to all the lives that we have touched. We can walk out every day of that town square, not back to what's safe, what's habit, but what inhibits, but walk towards being rich in God. We can live a life founded on our relationships with God, nature, and others. We don't need to settle for being rich fools or even middle class or working class fools. We can live a life in which there is more than just more. We can be a Francis. We can be free persons. Amen.